May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be always pleasing to you, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer.
Amen.
Amen. Please be seated. Jesus says a lot about the kingdom of heaven. His first public proclamation is, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven has drawn near." And then when his disciples ask him to teach them how to pray, he gives us that beautiful prayer, that prayer that we use centrally in all of our worship, the Lord's Prayer. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as in heaven. The kingdom of heaven has come near, and Jesus teaches us to pray that that kingdom will come and that God's will be done. The kingdom of heaven is clearly important to Jesus and important to us. He wants us to live in that place where heaven and earth come together. He wants us to live in such a way that we experience the presence of God, that we recognize the divine in one another, that we recognize Christ in those we love and in those we serve. The problem is that we live here in this world with our culture and our values and our expectations. And those values and those expectations and our culture, the worldly culture, don't always match up with God's kingdom. And so Jesus uses this parable of the laborers in the vineyard to shake us up, to shake us out of our complacency, to give us such a different way of looking at reality, a different set of values, that we can break free from the world and the world's expectations. He says, the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for the usual daily wage, he sent them into his vineyard. And then he went out again at 9, a few hours later, and hired some more, and again at noon, and again at 3 o'clock. And he said, "I'll pay you what's right." And then at 5 o'clock, he noticed that there was still a lot of work to be done, and so he went back into town. And sure enough, there were more people standing there. And he said, "Why are you standing here idle?" And they said, "Well, no one has hired us." And he said, "Go into my fields and work." This parable of the laborers in the vineyard challenges our expectations about fairness, about justice, and about honor. It raises a lot of questions, like, why did the landowner pay those laborers who only worked the last hour of the day as much as the laborers who had been there since 6 in the morning? And if he paid the last a full day's wages, why didn't he pay the ones who worked so much more, even more than that? That is just. That is fair. And then again, why did he even hire the laborers who are standing around idle at the end of the day? People who don't work are suspect. We don't tend to trust people who don't work in our culture. And he hires them anyway. And then why did he pay these layabouts who worked only an hour first and make all of those laborers who had worked through the heat of the day, he then made them wait until everyone else had been paid before they received their wages? When I was a kid, we lived in Peru, and I had an experience that for me brings home this story, or a part of this story. That experience of those laborers standing there, and the day has gone by and they haven't been hired. We lived in a small mining town in Peru, and it was on the coast, and this part of Peru is extremely arid. It's a desert. Literally nothing grows there. There are no plants at all. And yet we had a country club and a golf course. Now, how do you do a golf course when there's nothing growing? Well, you do it with sand. The greens were this very fine yellow sand that had been trucked in and then poured in circles, and they put a cup with a flag in the middle of it, and they carefully raked it flat, and the ball would land on it, and they'd rake a flat line to the cup and putt. But it was a desert, and it was rocky and sandy and rough, and so the only way to get through this course was to walk. There were no golf carts, and there weren't even really any of the carts that you pull behind you. So there was an industry of caddies. And all of these young men, mostly young boys, would come down to the golf club in the morning, and they would be hired by the golfers to carry their bags. And so you'd have a caddy just to carry your bag through the course. And I thought to myself, I'm going to make some money. I'm going to go carry a golf bag and make some money, because I see these Peruvian kids are making some money. I thought, why can't I do that? So I rode down there on my bicycle, and I parked my bike next to the clubhouse, and the other boys were laughing. And I thought, why are they laughing at me? And then the first car arrived, the first golfer arrived, and he pulled in his company truck, these bright orange trucks that the company gave out. And everybody, all dozen or more of these young kids, ran up and were mobbing the door of this truck, saying, hire me, hire me, hire me. And I just sort of stood back. I was like, whoa, I don't know if I want to do that. And eventually, after the third or fourth car came in or truck came in, I thought, I better get in there. And I got in there and I tried to make my way up to the front. And I was really the smallest kid there. And I never managed to get far enough forward quick enough to get hired. And after a couple of hours of this, I was pretty discouraged. And by lunchtime, I gave up and I went home. So I think that must have been at least a little bit what it was like for those laborers who at 5 o'clock in the afternoon were still standing there waiting for someone to hire them. I don't know if it happened like this, but I can imagine, the landowner coming to hire people for his vineyard, and he's mobbed with people who want jobs, and he says, you, and you, and off they go. And these are the guys that were at the back and never made it forward fast enough, or for whatever reason they didn't get hired. When the landowner in Jesus' parable shows up at the end of the day and hires them anyway, they must have been relieved. They would at least have a little bit of money, even if it was just payment for the end of the day. They must have been thrilled to get any work that day that had looked so much like it was going to go to waste. And then, when he paid them a full day's wage at the end, they must have been elated. I mean, it's so easy to imagine the scene. He has everybody line up in the reverse order of what they were hired, and he pays the last ones to come in a full day's wage. I can just see the guys at the end of the line going, man, we're going to get so much. This is going to be awesome. And then their excitement quickly turned to disappointment when they too received payment for a full day's labor and no more. And so the question I want to ask is, how is this like the kingdom of heaven? Is the kingdom of heaven unfair? This story asks us to choose between justice and love. Which is more important to us? Will we be guided by justice or by love? The landowner chose to express love in the form of generosity, and that was not just. He valued the labor of the last, hired 10 or 11 hours after the others as much as the first. This is hard to understand. It's hard to understand how the kingdom of heaven could work this way, and how could this be a good? Where's the value in this? Well, I saw a video. It's one of those viral videos that you see on the internet that I think helps us to understand this. It was a video of a little girl, probably about 4 years old, and she was just melting down. She was so mad at her dad. She was yelling at him and crying, and he, of course, had all the compassion in the world and stood there filming her through this whole meltdown. And what she was upset about was that her sister had gotten a purple lollipop, or frozen pop, and she hadn't. She'd gotten a grape icy, and she hadn't. The sister got one and I didn't, and it was just so unfair. And she was just like, "How could you do this to me, Daddy?" And the father had this wonderful thing to say. He listens to her for a minute, clearly hearing her, clearly recognized the pain in her heart at this injustice. And he says this beautiful thing. He says, "Darling, dearest, we do not look into our neighbor's bowl or our sister's bowl to see if we got as much. We look into our sister's bowl to make sure that she got enough." At the end of the parable of the workers who labored through at the end of the parable of the workers in the vineyard, those who worked through the entire day grumbled. "These last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat." But the landowner replied, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or are you envious because I am generous?" We struggle with this parable because we want the world to be fair. We believe in justice and equality. We look in someone else's bowl and we are envious if they have more than we do. We see someone with more and we demand justice. This story is about the intersection of heaven and earth, that place where the kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of earth overlap. When heaven breaks in and transforms the world, the rules change. When we participate as people, as the people in whom heaven and earth come together, our hearts are transformed. We are the church that feeds people. St. Dunstan's is the church that feeds people. And we hold a vision that on earth as in heaven, all are welcome, all are fed, and all are loved. We look at the world around us and we see people with very little to eat, people who are hungry, and so we feed them. The kingdom of heaven is like a daughter who looked into her sister's bowl to make sure she had enough too. So let's keep feeding people. Let's hang out together here where heaven and earth come together. Let's keep living for that vision that on earth as in heaven, all are welcome, all are fed, and all are loved.